Let's compare two creepy worms from the biological and digital worlds. Meet the bobbit worm, a 3-meter predator from the bottom of the ocean. Before tearing its prey apart, it paralyzes its body with venom. The bobbit worm was named after Lorena Bobbitt, the American woman who, in a fit of marital rage, cut off her husband's biological worm. And here's the Morris worm, 99 elegant lines of computer code, a harmless program created with a noble goal to map the internet. So, which of these two worms is scarier? Despite its horrifying appearance, there's no evidence that the bobbit worm is dangerous to humans. The Morris worm isn't dangerous either, not anymore at least. But back in 1988, it crashed the US internet for several days, causing the first digital apocalypse in history and affecting 10% of all existing computers. But the Morris worm is more than just a malicious program. It's a real phenomenon. It showed how important cybersecurity was and the terrifying cost of programming errors. Today, we're tackling these questions. What do Tolkien's monsters and a computer program have in common? And what does a worm have to do with it? How are alligators in the sewers and computer viruses similar? How much did the internet apocalypse cost? How did Soviet space developments influence the creation of the internet? And why was computer literacy equated to a cold weapon in 1986? What does the expression non-tolerable event mean in cybersecurity? And most importantly, how does all this impact our modern digital reality?
You're in room 1337 by Positive Hack Media. The door is open.
The first network worm was a program called Creeper, written by Bob Thomas in 1971. All Creeper did was move from computer to computer, displaying messages on teletypes or monitors.
I'm the Creeper. Catch me if you can.
It seemed more like a prank than malicious activity, though seeing such a message at night was indeed quite creepy. Eventually, the cute Creeper annoyed everyone, leading another programmer, Ray Tomlinson, to create a tool to eliminate it. This was the first antivirus, called Reaper. Its mission was to destroy Creeper. Thus began the virus wars. Formally, Creeper was a network worm, but back then, they didn't use the word worm. The term came a bit later. Computer worms owe their name to the science fiction writer John Brunner and his 1975 novel The Shockwave Rider. In this book, a worm is a program that strips an evil authoritarian computer of its power. Apparently, these words inspired a group of engineers at Xerox PARC.
There's never been a worm with that tough a head or that long a tail. It's building itself. Don't you understand? It can't be killed.
In the late 1970s, they invented the first network worm, but this time in the real world. Since then, according to Wikipedia, 40 even more destructive varieties of network worms have been recorded. In cybersecurity, a network worm is a type of malware that spreads through the network on its own. Can we call network worms viruses? Technically, yes, but they're actually quite different. A virus is designed to infect as many files on a computer as possible, while a worm is focused on spreading to more and more computers. If your computer has a virus, it's likely that you got it by clicking on suspicious websites or links. But with a worm, it doesn't matter how careful you are, it would still find its way onto your computer. When that happens, it's incredibly frustrating. So much so that it makes you want to cry. Which is exactly the name given to a vicious cocktail made up of malware, a network worm, and ransomware. Many cybersecurity experts still get chills down their spine from these words. Billions of dollars in damages and hundreds of thousands of paralyzed computers. All it took to get infected was a powered-on computer, an outdated Windows, and an internet connection. And speaking of the internet, To better understand all the events surrounding the Great Morris Worm, let's take a brief dive into history and see what the internet was like at the end of the last century. After all it takes to catch a worm is just a simple connection to the network. October 4th, 1957. The Soviet Union launches Sputnik 1, the first artificial Earth satellite. For all of humanity, a new space era began, giving a powerful boost to scientific, military, and technological development. And it also led to increased tensions between the USSR and the USA. If you had to name one of the top fears of any nation, espionage would definitely be in the top 3. Even the slightest chance that an outsider might learn something they shouldn't know is extremely unpleasant. Take the United States, for example. They're so paranoid about Chinese espionage that they see it lurking around every corner. That's why the US tried to ban everything from consumer drones, like DJI and TikTok, to computer chips and even construction cranes. In February 2023, an astonishing thing happened. A whole military operation was carried out for one single purpose: to shoot down a balloon, which, according to the Pentagon, was sent by the Chinese to spy on the USA. If they got so worked up over a balloon, imagine the emotions during the launch of Sputnik 1. Here are some newspaper clippings from that time.
We will not stand for another defeat like this. How did the Reds launch first? The Soviets' greatest victory. Communism triumphs. Our era of overconfidence has ended.
What is your feeling about this Soviet accomplishment?
Well, as usual, they're ahead of us, a little step ahead.
When it became clear in 1957 that a space satellite could theoretically fly over American skies and gather data, the American government began to take action. The satellite launch seriously damaged the reputation of the US. And considering it was still the Cold War, such a thing was simply unacceptable. As a result, a year after the launch of Sputnik 1, the 34th President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, ordered the creation of 2 agencies. The first one was the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA for short. But for our story, the second one is more important: DARPA, which stands for the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, initially called ARPA. The Pentagon gave DARPA its first task: to develop a secure technology for transmitting information within the country. You know, the kind that can't be seen from a satellite. 10 years later, in 1969, ARPANET was created, the precursor to the World Wide Web and the life-changing invention of our time, the Internet. At the start, it was possible to transmit the syllable LO, the first letters of the word login, between 2 distant computers 600 kilometers apart. From that moment on, the technology began to slowly evolve. In 1973, the network was extended to the United Kingdom and Norway, making it international. In 1977, it connected 100 computers. By 1984, that number increased to 4,000. By the time the Morris worm appeared on November 2, 1988, 60,000 computers had been connected to ARPANET. Interestingly, ARPANET was a Pentagon project, and the military was reluctant to share the technology at first. It was an exclusive domain, accessible only to people from academic and government backgrounds. However, remote information transfer proved to be very convenient, leading to more and more devices being connected. And one of the lucky ones who got to experience the early internet was Robert Tappan Morris Jr., our main character. Robert Tappan Morris Jr. looked like a cross between a young Matt Damon and Jim Morrison. From a young age, he had a keen interest in science, excelled in school, got into Harvard, and later pursued graduate studies at Cornell University. He also had a very cool dad, Robert Morris Sr., a renowned cryptographer, information security expert, and NSA employee. Now, I'd like you to keep in mind two events. The first one happened in 1986. A very important law on computer fraud, the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act, was passed. From that moment on, computer knowledge potentially became a tool for crime, equivalent to a cold weapon. There were no criminals, yet the conditions for committing crimes were already there. Just imagine. In the 1960s, the first viruses appeared. In the early 1970s, Creeper was invented, and by the end of the decade, engineers from Xerox created the first worm. Then came the pandemic of Elk Cloner, a boot sector virus, on Apple II computers. Finally, in 1984, scientist Fred Cohen officially introduced the term computer virus. The conditions for crime were ripe. Yet, until 1988, the defendant's bench remained empty of any cybercriminals. Now let's move on to the second event. It was 1988. Meet Peter Norton, a significant figure for the entire digital community. After spending 5 years in a Buddhist monastery in the 1980s, he created an incredibly cool PC program for recovering deleted data, along with a bunch of other equally useful products, all under his own brand, Norton. And here he was, this legendary figure, writing what I dare say was an iconic article where he shared his thoughts on computer viruses.
Computer viruses are like alligators in a New York sewer, just an urban legend.
Such was the cybersecurity landscape of the late 1980s. On one side, an empty, dusty defendant's bench. On the other, skepticism and lame jokes. Keep this in mind, and you'll find the end of story much more thrilling. Now, let's turn our attention back to Robert Morris. A young researcher was fascinated by the internet and its possibilities. At Cornell University, in his spare time during his postgraduate studies, he was passionately working on an idea that he would one day call just an experimental project. The 23-year-old researcher wanted to gauge the size of ARPANET and create a map of it. For this, he created a special program that could move unnoticed from computer to computer across the network. He created a network worm, but Morris was not an idiot and knew that no one would ever permit him to release this special program of his. Aware of the consequences, Morris acted with great caution. On November 2, 1988, he remotely hacked into a computer at the Holy of Holies, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, and launched this floppy disk, which is now one of the exhibits at the Computer History Museum in Mountain View. After that, he erased all traces of his presence. What happened next can be described in words from the Bhagavad Gita, which became a doomsday metaphor thanks to another Robert Oppenheimer.
Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
Every computer in America that connected to the internet that morning crashed and stopped working. One of these affected institutions was the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, the very institution responsible for the security of nuclear weapons in the USA. Quote from the FBI.
Vital military and university functions slowed to a crawl. Emails were delayed for days.
Victims hoped that power system failures were to blame, but it soon became clear that an unknown malicious program was prowling the network, later to be named the Morris worm. Within 15 hours, the worm had infected 2,000 computers. In just a few days, more than 6,000 devices were infected. That's 10% of all U.S. internet-connected devices in 1988. However, some experts believe that it was only 2,000 devices. The exact damage is impossible to calculate. Nevertheless, a range of 2,000 to 6,000 is still impressive. The situation needed a quick response. The troubleshooting team was so impressive, you'd expect to see them at the president's birthday party, for example. Let's name a few: the CIA, FBI, National Cybersecurity Center, National Institute of Standards and Technology, Defense Communications Agency, DARPA, Ballistics Research Laboratory, and a few others. But even with all the fuss and the brainpower involved in the operation, neutralizing the threat was difficult. And there are 3 reasons for that. Morris's skill, a colossal mistake, an unexpected twist. Let's dive into each one in detail. Robert understood the challenge at hand. The more complex the code, the harder it is to implement in a system. His worm had only 99 lines, was written in the relatively simple C language, and relied on minimal binary compilation. Morris was not only well-versed in digital systems, he also understood the world that interacted with such systems. And what kind of world was it? Essentially, a utopia. Even though ARPANET was used by agencies that we would now call critical infrastructure, cybersecurity was supposed to protect against outsiders. When it came to protecting against internal threats, there was absolutely nothing in place. Vulnerabilities weren't patched, and it was easy to gain access to personal data or any computer. Most passwords were simple, just the user's first and last name, or not used at all.
The internet used to be like a small town where users didn't particularly worry about leaving their front doors unlocked at night.
There was another category of people, hackers. But these weren't some fringe intruders. They were brilliant programmers. The appearance of computers was a true gift for them. They weren't just consumers of the digital age, but its high priests. While some were settling into the new world, hackers were building it, studying it, and often gaining privileges that others didn't have. Robert Morris was 100% a hacker, and he knew exactly how to make the worm do its job. He exploited vulnerabilities in 3 popular services of the time. SendMail, similar to modern email. Finger, a tool that provides information about a user on a remote computer. And the dictionary-based password brute-forcing bug. In the case of SendMail, the worm intercepted the email, embedded itself, and then sent the infected version to the recipient, thus spreading across the network. If this didn't work, the worm tried to infect the device through the finger program. Imagine, it's 1988, and I want to connect to computer B from my computer A. Most of the time, it works. Most devices have the trust function, so I can easily access another computer. The worm can also easily infiltrate and infect the machine. But when there's no trust function, a password is required. This wasn't a problem for the worm either. Morris embedded a few simple password brute force methods and a 400-word dictionary into the program, allowing it to clone itself onto more and more computers. Just so you know, this trick wouldn't work today. Back then, you could try an unlimited number of passwords without any pauses between attempts. Today, you've got 3 to 5 attempts to enter the correct password before the system locks you out and requests a more complex authorization procedure. We owe this precaution to the Morris worm. Now, let's talk about talent. Morris's program was excellent at hiding its presence in the network, making it difficult even for top experts to detect and understand how it worked. The worm deleted executable files, disabled error messages, disguised itself as safe files, and so on. In other words, it was a true cyber assassin. Yes, Robert Morris was talented. Hackers dubbed the Morris worm the Great Worm, a direct reference to the mighty creatures from Tolkien's world, Smaug and Glaurung. But the genius of the Morris worm lay in its flaws. That's not unusual. Take stainless steel, plastic, mirror neurons, anesthesia, and pacemakers, for example. All these discoveries were made accidentally, as a result of mistakes. I hope I've intrigued you. Remember, Morris's main goal was to measure the size of ARPANET. What does that mean? Have a look. Place a flag on one computer, then on the second, third, and so on. Then count the flags and voila, that's the size of the internet. Ideally, a computer should have just one instance of the program. That's why, after getting to a computer, the worm would ask, "Am I present on this computer?" If there was no worm, it infiltrated the computer. And if there was, one of the computers had to shut down, blocking the installation of the program. This is how it should have worked. But the internet gods had other plans. Imagine, a club owner decides to throw the biggest party in town and sends an invitation to every single house. Worried that someone might not show up, he adds in the text, "Pass this invitation to your neighbor who lives 7 doors away." But he doesn't clarify how many times the invitation could be passed on, or in which direction to count. Do you see where this leads? That's right. To the biggest party in the world, not just in town. The same thing happened with the Morris program. The worm kept looping through the network, installing itself on various devices. More and more new copies of the worm overloaded the machine, causing a denial of service. Today, this is called a DDoS attack, although it's now carried out using different methods. For example, by millions of bots trying to connect to a website at once. The cherry on top for Robert was the unexpected surprise. Originally, Morris designed his program for 2 types of computers, VAX and Sun. But the worm was so appealing to other systems that they adapted it for themselves. Now you know the 3 reasons why the Morris worm became the first cyberweapon in history, and Morris himself became a federal-level cybercriminal. When Morris woke up, he probably freaked out at what was happening. The experiment was out of control. He got scared and scrambled to try to make things right. First, he asked a friend to send an anonymous email with an apology and instructions on removing the malicious software, but it never reached its destination. Why? Because the internet, gosh darn it, was down across the whole country. Then he asked another friend to call the New York Times editorial office.
Hello, I know the creator of the program, and they are ready to provide a removal instructions. RTM didn't mean any harm. What happened was just some wild mistake.
Yes, he said RTM, and totally threw his friend under the bus. Cross-referencing the database, journalists found the perfect match, Robert Tappan Morris. Robert knew it was only a matter of time before he was caught. He decided to turn himself in to the authorities. One version suggests that he was urged to do so by his father after the latter received a call from NSA agents who revealed that they knew about his son's actions. So, what kind of punishment did Robert Morris face? Surprisingly, it was pretty light. Originally, he faced 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. But after an appeal, the sentence was reduced to a $10,000 fine, 400 hours of community service, and 3 years of probation. How did he manage to get away with it? It's simple. In cybersecurity, there's a term called payload. Payload is destructive malware actions such as deleting or stealing files, damaging computers, anything that harms your digital device or infrastructure. The Morris worm didn't carry a payload. After analysis was done, it became clear that its purpose was not to cause harm. Here's what one of the SendMail developers, Eric Allman, said in Robert's defense.
The trap snapped shut due to a combination of several harmless features.
That was the tale of the first ever internet pandemic. Now, we've reached the most important chapter, the legacy of the Great Morris Worm. First, after the events of 1988, November 30th was designated as International Computer Security Day, a celebration we continue to honor to this day. But that's not all. Robert Morris became the first cybercriminal charged under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act of 1986. From then on, the defendant's bench for digital hackers was no longer empty. Within a month of the worm invasion, there were more than 11 attempts to inject various viruses into the internet. Then came the hacker 1990s, with Carters, hacktivists, and cybercrime gangs. Hollywood's leading ladies, Angelina Jolie and Sandra Bullock, portrayed hackers in movies. The era of digital utopia was over. The world understood that neglecting cybersecurity could harm not just individuals, but entire nations. The world was split between hackers and defenders. By 2025, experts forecasted that the annual cost of cybercrime would reach an unprecedented $10.5 trillion. By the way, I bet you're curious about how Robert Morris's life turned out. He kept his cool. In 1995, he founded ViaWeb, a company that developed software for online stores. In 1998, he sold it to Yahoo for a staggering $48 million. Today, he teaches at the respected institution he once hacked, MIT, consults for the company Meraki, and is the founder of Y Combinator, an accelerator for over 4,000 startups. In a word, life is good. And that's the end of our story. Special thanks go to Alexei Lukatsky, one of the most iconic figures in Russian cybersecurity and an information security business consultant at Positive Technologies. His knowledge and expertise made this show truly fascinating. You've been in room 1337. See you again soon. Stay positive. Goodbye.